Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Lesson 8 of Warlords of Japan. I don't want to make you sad, but this is the last lesson like this we're going to do. There's one more normally I do, but it's really short, and it's on modern Japan, and it's not really a story. It's more or less just a kind of catching up on things are. But I've decided I'm just going to kind of scrap that one, and we're going to just move on from here. Now, believe it or not, we've been doing this a month. We did lessons 1 and 2. What was that, 4 weeks ago, and then we did 3 and 4 3 weeks ago, 5 and 6 last week, and then 7 and 8 this week. So it's been a month already. It's kind of crazy. Today we're going to talk about World War II. So we left off, Tuesday we learned about Commodore Perry opening up Japan to trade. That opened up Japan to new ideas. They've been locked in this concept for 250 years of this isolation. Emperor Meiji, in his restoration, which is what you read about yesterday, established a lot of change quickly and rapidly for Japan. And that led to a massive growth of Japanese culture and the economy. So a lot of people ask, and if we were in class, I'm sure one of you would ask me, how come if the United States was friendly with Japan and we helped open up trade, why did they bomb us in Pearl Harbor at the beginning of World War II? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here we go. So Commodore Perry's visit to Japan in 1854 brought about rapid changes. After living in the old traditional fashion of a feudal society, Japan made it a national priority to catch up to the rest of the modern world as quickly as possible. Practically all aspects of society were modernized. Because of the excitement and fascination with all things modern, the Japanese were eager to introduce many items of Western culture into their own culture, just as Prince Shotoku had adapted many qualities from the Chinese culture centuries earlier. If you remember that story, that was the second story, how they copied the Chinese. Well, now, and I think I mentioned this a month ago, that instead of copying the Chinese now, they're going to copy, oops, let me go back. You'll get to that picture in a second. Instead of copying the Chinese, they're now going to copy Western culture. So everything Western was studied and copied, from railroads and telegraphs to the postal service and schools. So everything was copied. Now, this was one of those concepts where they realized that they were so far behind that they had to copy to catch up. Now, again, one thing I would ask you in class, and I want you all to be honest with you yourself and with me virtually, how many of you have ever copied homework? We all have, right? Even the best of us once in a while go, oh shoot. I remember I was in high school one time and I forgot to do an assignment, or I forgot, or something happened, I don't remember. But I didn't get it done, and I asked my friend if I could copy his homework, and they did let me. And I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have done my own work. My justification was, I'm just going to do it just to get caught up, and then I'm going to do my own work, which I did. The Japanese did the same thing. They said, you know what, we're so far behind, we can't innovate. It would take us 250 years to catch up to the rest of the world. So we're going to copy what they've done, and then once we do our own thing, we're going to catch up. We're going to start doing our own thing. Now, you saw this accidentally for a second. I've used phones as kind of an example from almost the first couple of weeks of school to now the last few weeks of school. We understand phones. We use them all the time. In fact, you're looking at one right now. I'm doing this presentation, recording it on my phone while I'm showing this presentation. So we use phones all the time. On the on the right-hand side of this, we see the very first iPhone. On the left-hand side is the very first Samsung Galaxy. Now, if you look at them closely, they look pretty much the same. Obviously, there's some differences in, it says Samsung and the buttons, but the icons look the same. The shape is exactly the same. The colors are the same. Even like the phone icon, if you notice, they're both in the bottom left-hand corner, and they're both green with a white phone. They're virtually identical. So what happened was Apple was rumored for coming out with a phone for a couple of years. And because I'm an Apple nerd, I followed that rumor pretty closely. What the rumors were versus what came out, there wasn't even a match. No one had any concept what the iPhone was going to be, or what it became. No one guessed it. We all had these different ideas of what the iPhone was going to be. When it popped out and he showed it to us, it was like, what? There's no screen, there's no keyboard, there's no flip up keyboard. What do you mean you touch your finger? It was completely foreign, right? It took the world by shock. If it shocked the consumers, it completely shocked other manufacturers as well. Samsung realized, and other companies as well, shoot, we are so behind on this. And Apple admitted it took them 3 or 4 years to do all the research and development on this phone and to make it work and all of that. So a lot of companies like Samsung that were left scrambling. Samsung so it took Apple 3 or 4 years to make the iPhone. Within 6 months of the iPhone coming out, a year, whatever it was, this Samsung appears. Well, it's obvious they copied it. Apple sued them. It takes a couple of years for the court systems and trials and stuff, and Samsung knew. They've admitted to this. They admitted that they actually did copy the iPhone, but they knew that they were just going, like I do with my homework, and just like the Japanese did with their postal service in schools, they were just going to copy to get caught up. And once they got caught up, then they start doing their own thing and making it right. So what Samsung did on this was they copied the iPhone, and they knew it'd take 2 or 3 years to get through the courts, and by that time, they'd have their own technology developed. They could afford to pay Apple the fees, and then they would be on their, Samsung Galaxy 4 or whatever at that point, and they'd be on their own, and it'd be different than the iPhone, and that'd be fine. And that's exactly what happened. And so that's another example of just kind of copying something to get caught up. So the Japanese did that with everything of society, postal service, schools, everything. Okay, modern factories were built, copied from factories of the Western world. It was the ambition of the Japanese people to be recognized as an equal by the world's most powerful nations. This was a huge thing because these, again, is a country that had been shut down for 250 years. They had no modernization whatsoever, and then they wanted to be an equal right away. That's pretty bold, but they're going to try really hard. So opportunity for emerging nation. Now, as Japan entered the 20th century, that's the 1900s, so we're up to modern times here. The military had gained the upper hand in controlling the government. So remember, the emperor took over, abolished the samurai, abolished the feudal system, but over time the military gained hand. So it's kind of like the samurai were the military class essentially before. Now it's the actual military that they built. Wars with Russia and China had been fought as Japan attempted to use force to expand its influence. And by 1940, war was also raging in Europe, and Japan saw opportunities developing. All right, so we're now in 1940. Let me give you like a 2-minute primer on World War II. You ready? Here we go, real fast. End of World War I. Germany was made responsible. They were forced to pay all these countries a bunch of money, put Germany into this economic ruin. There's a man that emerged, said, I will find jobs for people. I will defy the law that says we can't build an army, that says we can't have certain things, and I'll promise you I'll give you jobs. And his name was Adolf Hitler. And he started a political party called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's a long thing to say, so everyone just kind of nicknamed it the Nazi Party, National Socialist German Workers' Party. Apparently it can shorten it down to Nazi or something like that. So it's the Nazi Party. That's what that means. And it was a political party. And in the 1920s, they staged a revolt against Germany. Hitler was thrown into jail for that. While he was in jail, he wrote a book that basically explained all the troubles he felt were wrong with Germany. He blamed a lot of different people, mainly ethnic groups. Completely false, in fact, and factless, but he blamed it. He gained a lot of following. He was released from prison because he was popular because of his book. He then ran for president in 1932. He lost, but his Nazi party gained a lot of seats in the Reichstag, which is it's basically like the German Congress. The president of Germany, his name was Hindenburg, he realized that Hitler was a threat. He knew that Hitler tried to overthrow the government before, so he gave Hitler a position in power called Chancellor, which is basically second in command, because he knew that if Hitler didn't get power that way, he might try to take it by force. So he gave Hitler power. A year later, in 1933, Hindenburg died, and that left Hitler completely in charge of the government. He abolished the position of president and became the sole ruler of Germany, and therefore he became or started enacting his policies. It's at that time he started something called the Holocaust, which we're not going to get into much here, but it was discriminating, imprisoning, and torturing and killing over almost 12 million people over the course of 12 years from 1933 to 1945. All right. So Hitler then, though, aside from doing all that, he says he wants to, well, he doesn't say he wants to take over Europe, but he tells people he doesn't want to. So he starts invading parts of Europe. He invades Poland in 1939. At that point, in 1939, Hitler had, I'm sorry, let me back up. Poland had an agreement, with Great Britain and France that said if you're ever invaded, we'll protect you. So Poland was invaded. By Germany, that means that Britain and France had to come to Poland's aid. They had to declare war on Germany. That started World War II. Okay, sorry, probably a little longer than 2 minutes. But so by 1940, war was going crazy. Now, what's crazy about this is that by 1940, 1941, Germany controlled most of Europe. It was very fast. Their army was very, very powerful, and many countries had either fallen to Germany or surrendered to Germany, and Germany ruled many of the countries in Europe. Okay. Now, because some European countries had taken control of resources in Asia, Japan saw the possibility of capturing these resources from the Europeans. By aligning itself with Germany and Italy, Japan would be able to take over the Dutch-held oil reserves and the valuable British-held ports throughout Asia and the Pacific. Let me explain this real fast. I'll try to make this succinct and as much as possible. Countries in Europe, like the Netherlands, like the French, like the British, they all controlled islands in the Pacific, way far away. Okay, this is part of their imperialistic ideas. They all controlled islands in the Pacific, including the United States, by the way. We held the Philippines. We didn't control them, but we were kind of in charge, sort of. So Japan was running out of resources. They had been growing so fast. They needed lumber, they needed oil, they needed a lot of food, and they had exhausted their resources on their islands. So they started looking at these other places in the Pacific close to them, these islands. But these islands were controlled by countries in Europe that were at war with Germany. Japan knew that if they invaded these islands, that would be a new act of war, and that would cause some problems, and it would make a bunch of countries skittish and upset. But they said, these countries, these European countries that control these islands in the Pacific, are at war with Germany and Italy. If we ally ourselves with them, then we can go onto those islands and get what we want, and that's just part of us being at war with them already. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So they decided to join forces with Germany so that they could then take the war in the Pacific. Now, and control that. So I hope that makes sense. And that allowed them to then kind of have free reign of the Pacific islands to go grab what they wanted to do. I don't think they really, really liked Germany and Italy. I just think they were speaking for themselves, trying to get what they needed for themselves, and that was the easiest way to do that. So they joined forces with Germany and Italy, and that allowed them to get control of those Pacific islands. Now, Japan's large population and its desire to expand created a need for more resources. By going to war against America, Japan would be able to keep America out of Asia, allowing Japan to conquer all the Asian and Pacific resources. So they were allied with Germany and Italy, but they had one problem, and that was the United States. The United States was trying to stay out of the war. They had this concept called isolationism. They were trying to stay out. They were supplying supplies and even some personnel to Great Britain to help them fight, but as far as a nation, the United States stayed out of it. So, however, the United States controlled the Philippines, like I said a minute ago. That meant that if in the Philippines had a lot of lumber and a lot of oil, a lot of stuff that the Japanese wanted, but if they attacked the Philippines, that would have been a problem because Americans would fight, and they knew they couldn't stand against Americans. So they said, we got to come up with a plan to keep America out of Asia, to keep America out of this war, so that we can go get what we want. I hope this all makes sense. If you need to go back and play this again, I know you don't want to because it takes more time, but if you need to go back and play that again, hopefully it'll make sense. All right. Now here's their war plan. By 1941, military leaders developed a bold plan where Japan could conquer Asia and keep America out. Many officers saw America as a sleeping giant. That's a quote from one of the Japanese naval officers, a sleeping giant, but not yet ready to fight, but potentially dangerous. If they could pull off a sneak attack to destroy America's Pacific Fleet and keep the Pacific War fairly short, they could succeed with their goals for expansion. Is a sleeping giant dangerous? Nope. Not until you wake that giant up. When I was a kid, I used to listen to the story Jack and the Beanstalk, and the giant's asleep, and he's not fee fi fo fumming, and he grabs that harp that starts singing or something like that. I forget. And the harp wakes up the giant, and Jack has to climb down the beanstalk and chop it down and blah blah blah. Well, the giant wasn't a danger until he woke up. The United States was seen as that sleeping giant. They are fine as long as they're asleep. But if you wake them up, then we got some serious problems. So they decided we need to sneak attack them to surprise them, kill them basically while they're asleep. Okay. So according to the plan, a weakened America would concede and allow Japan the rich prize of Asia. The majority of America's naval fleet was stationed in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. The Japanese chose this site for their sneak attack. Pearl Harbor is a fantastic naval spot. The naval fleet was held in San Diego for a long time. That was their headquarters. And then when the United States took control of Hawaii, they moved their headquarters to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Hawaii was not a state at this point. It's just a territory. It won't become a state until 1959. This is 1941, so it's well long before they became a state. But it was still American property, and so the United States, the Japanese chose Pearl Harbor for their sneak attack. So on December 7th, 1941, Japan launched its attack on Pearl Harbor. The unsuspecting Americans were bombed and torpedoed by waves of Japanese planes. The Americans were unable to respond while their ships, planes, and air and naval bases were pounded and destroyed. Let me stop and say something here. So December 7th, 1941 is a big, big day. But this did not just happen. It wasn't like December 6th. Everybody's, hey, good night, Japan. Good night, America. Love you. See you in the morning. And then all of a sudden they wake up and we're mad. The tensions had been growing. Tensions had been growing because Japan was poking around the Pacific and the United States didn't like that. They were doing they were invading China. They were doing all sorts of things that the United States just didn't dig with them. And so there wasn't this, we were not peachy keen, done, like I said, the day before, and all of a sudden we get bombed. We knew there was tensions coming. We knew there was a potential of this. And we even knew that there was a potential for an attack. We didn't know when or where. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories that say we knew, and just let those go. Don't worry. Those are factless, so don't worry about that. But we did know that there was a potential attack coming because of what they had been doing. We knew that, hey, if they're going to attack China and they're going to attack, all these other islands, they could attack us. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility. So they attacked Pearl Harbor. It was a Sunday morning. The Japanese knew 7 o'clock in the morning. The Japanese knew that 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, people were going to be a little less on their game. This early in the morning, it's the weekend. A lot of the officers got the weekends off. People were sleeping in on Sunday mornings. Some people had stayed up too late the night before because it was a Saturday night and they weren't in their best form on Sunday morning. Some people were kind of getting ready for church or whatever. Sunday, they knew it was a good time to pull off a snack, especially a snack. Did I say snack? I must be hungry. A sneak attack. I just made a new word. Sneak attack is snack. So there you go. It's an attack. What's crazy is it's like almost 11 o'clock at night. So this is Wednesday night at 11, and I'm thinking about snacks. If that tells you where I'm at, my head's at. So anyway, now I can think of I just want some chips and salsa. What was I talking about? Okay, so they said if we can pull off a sneak attack, then I completely lost my thought. I seriously not thinking about chips and salsa. Okay, let me just move on. That's now I know where it was. Sunday morning, the best time for a sneak attack because again, they weren't at their best form. Okay, sorry about that. Now you guys want chips and salsa too, right? Yeah, it's good stuff. Okay. Now, in less than 2 hours, the attack was over. 2,403 Americans were dead and 1,178 were injured. The Japanese had destroyed 188 American planes and damaged or destroyed 18 U.S. warships while losing only 29 of their own planes. The attack was considered a great success by the Japanese, but it awoke and angered the sleeping giant. After the attack was done and the Japanese were headed back to Japan, there's a quote, and we assume it's true, that the naval Japanese admiral, I forget his name, famous guy, but I forget his name. They said, "Aren't you so excited?" And he was very somber. He said, "All I fear we've done is awoken the sleeping giant." So that's where we get that phrase, the sleeping giant. So here's the thing. Prior to this, I told you tensions had been kind of growing with Japan. If you know where Hawaii is, if you don't know where Hawaii is, get out a map, look where Hawaii is. It's pretty close to Japan. I mean, it's far south, but it's a lot closer to Japan than the United States mainland is. And as a result, a lot of people in Hawaii had descendants of Japanese culture. In fact, a super good friend of mine, I used to work with her in my school in California. She's Hawaiian, but her grandmother is Japanese. And she was born in Hawaii. She's just pure Hawaiian, but her grandmother is Japanese, and so there's a lot of Japanese culture in her family. So the Americans thought that because, again, Hawaii's not even a state yet, and they'd only controlled Hawaii for a short time, that if there was a potential war with Japan, that some of the Hawaiians would be more loyal to the Japanese than they would be to the Americans, and so they were concerned about sabotage. And so what they did was they parked all their airplanes together really, really close, because if you've got a big airstrip of airplanes and you have to patrol them. It's a lot of area to patrol, but if you pack all your airplanes right next to each other, wingtip to wingtip, it's a lot less area to control, worried about people coming in and doing stuff to your airplanes. It's a brilliant idea, except for the fact if you get bombed from above. And so if you had your airplanes spread out, if the Japanese drop a bomb on one plane, it's just going to explode one plane. But because these airplanes were super close together, a wingtip to wingtip essentially, they drop a bomb on one airplane, well, it's going to catch, it's going to explode, and it's going to kaboom, 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 and all the planes are going to destroy, which is why so many airplanes were damaged or destroyed in their attack. Okay, so they woke the sleeping giant. Now, on December 8th, President Franklin Roosevelt announced to a shocked nation that Congress had declared war on Japan. 3 days later, the U.S. declared war on Germany and Italy as well. With the world at war, Japan's plan to dominate Asia was underway, and the Japanese felt confident of victory. So again, we had to declare war on Japan. A couple days later, Germany and Italy, because they were allied with the Japanese as well. Okay. So Japan's crippling attack at Pearl Harbor left America weak and slow to respond to Japan's war in the Pacific. The Japanese military won victory after victory, capturing Hong Kong, Malaya, the oil-rich Dutch East Indies, Singapore, and the Philippines. They were grabbing all these islands. Japan had hoped the U.S. would concentrate its war efforts in Europe, but equal priority was given to the Pacific War, and the Pacific Fleet was soon rebuilt and back in action. Let me stop here for just a second. I told you we declared war on Japan, but also on Germany and Italy. Germany, under the rule of Hitler, was running around Europe trying to take over Europe. And so the Japanese figured, you know what, the United States is going to focus more on Hitler because he's our super bad guy, right? So they're going to focus more on their war in Europe and not so much on the Pacific. Well, they were wrong. They focused a lot of attention on the Pacific War just as much as the European war. They're called war theaters. And they put as much emphasis on the Pacific theater as they did in the European theater. And eventually, now getting back here, the momentum of the war turned against Japan with American victories at Midway Island in the Coral Sea. I think just last year or sometime soon, there's a movie called Midway. It's a remake of a movie back in the 70s or 80s about this attack at Midway. I didn't see the movie. Mrs. Cox saw it. She said it was meh. But you get the idea that this is still in our culture. American and other Allied forces under General Douglas MacArthur fought back, capturing one island after another. They called this the island hopping campaign. They'd go to an island, they'd secure it, move on, get to the next one, they move on, get to the next one, move on, trying to get to Japan. Now, the Japanese proved to be a difficult foe, often preferring death to being captured in the tradition of the samurai warriors. So let me stop here. You guys remember I told you, it was 3 weeks ago when we talked about the development of the samurai. I believe it was the Yoritomo lesson, where the samurai preferred to take their own life rather than be killed in battle. It was more honorable to die at your own hand. And we talked about how that contrasts to our culture. I'm going to tell you another quick story. There's a movie called Letters from Iwo Jima. It's directed by Clint Eastwood. In fact, he made two movies back to back. One was called Flags of Our Fathers, which is about the flag. In fact, I'm going to go to this picture here. Many of you have probably seen this picture. It's a little staged. We found out later on, but it's still a very, very powerful picture of these Marines lifting the flag. This is on the island of Iwo Jima. So he made a movie. There's a book called Flags of Our Fathers. It was turned into a book, and it's about this picture. While he was making this movie, Clint Eastwood, the director, he realizes another story on this island from the Japanese perspective. So while this one was finishing up in post-production, he starts filming basically the same story, but from the Japanese perspective. And this movie is called Letters from Iwo Jima. The movie's all in black and white. The movie's entirely in Japanese. The only English spoken in the movie is when they capture an American soldier, and one of the Japanese soldiers speaks English, and there's a little bit of English. But it's a fantastic movie. I enjoyed it more than Flags for Our Fathers. But in the end of the movie, just to spoil the story, because it's a war story, the Japanese lose Iwo Jima to the Americans. And it shows at the end of the movie these Japanese soldiers hiding in caves, knowing that they're going to lose the island. And instead of being taken prisoner, and they know the war is almost over. By this point, it's mid-1945, the Japanese know they're going to lose the war. They're just fighting to kind of fight. And they know that if they get captured, they'll be put in a POW camp for a while, but released. And they know the Americans are going to treat them well in a POW camp, but they don't choose that because they want to follow in the footsteps of the samurai from years past. And it's this gruesome scene. I won't get too graphic, but they just blow themselves up with hand grenades. Okay, it's pretty gross. But that's the same concept, where they prefer to take their own life than to be taken by an enemy. We talked about kamikaze. It means divine wind, but that term was adopted by airplane pilots in World War II, where they would fly their planes into a building, killing themselves, but also killing several others, enemies as well. And so that concept of taking your life in battle, and that was very honorable. So let me go back here real quick. So by 1945, the U.S. was prepared to deal the final blow. The United States had gotten to an island of Iwo Jima. They're headed to Okinawa, which is just south of Japan. If they were to invade Japan with armies and traditional bombs, it was going to extend the war by years, and millions of lives on both sides were going to be lost. Okay? However, rather than American troops invading Japan, the decision to use America's newest weapon, the atomic bomb, was made. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima, instantly destroying more than 60% of the city. And on August 9th, 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped in Nagasaki with an equal amount of death and destruction. So President Roosevelt died during World War II. His successor, Harry Truman, the vice president, took over. He was immediately told of the atomic bomb that they've been working on. So he decided to use that on August 6th. They picked Hiroshima, which is an industrial city. It was not there were civilians living there, but it was mainly a military industrial city. So they dropped the bomb. Now, if we were in class, I'd go into way more detail on this, but let me just, hopefully you can understand this. Traditional bombs blow up when they hit the ground. Atomic bombs are designed to blow up in the air, and when they blow up in the air, they shoot down an intense amount of radiation directly below the bomb, with about a half a mile to a mile radius. That's called ground zero. And it's this massive, intensive heat. In fact, scientists say that for that long, I don't know if you could hear my snap that long, quicker than that, that heat in that ground zero is 10 times hotter than the surface of the sun. I'll say that again, 10 times hotter than the surface of the sun for that long. What that does is it vaporizes and destroys everything in its path. Anything that is living is gone. Oops, sorry, hold on a second. Got a text, there we go. Vaporized everything, just gone. So, and buildings were crippled and destroyed. It was a terrible, terrible thing. It destroyed, they figured, hey, the Japanese are going to surrender. They didn't. 3 days later, they said, hey, we're going to do this again if you don't surrender. We're not going to surrender. We've never surrendered. Remember, we talked about that. were never surrendered. Sorry. Um, on August 9th, 3 days later, they dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki, also military and industrial center, and with an equal amount of destruction. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was nicknamed Little Boy. The bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki was nicknamed Fat Man because it was kind of big and fat, big and round, and the little boy was kind of long and skinny, so that's what they nicknamed him. Okay, so they said, we'll do it again. Now, before we move on, these are pictures, and I don't want to stay too long in here, but I mentioned that when the bombs hit, there's a flash of intense heat, and it vaporized everything. Well, these are actual photographs of images. You can see the one on the left here, where it shows someone that was standing at the bottom of these steps. You know, you take a flash with your camera, and it creates a shadow. Well, it's the same kind of concept, but this heat was so hot, it burned a shadow of the person that on the ground or on the wall, but they were vaporized. And so this shadow here, you see the person on the steps carrying like a cane or something, they were instantly vaporized. They did not know anything was coming. It was just gone. Their life was gone. There was no pain, but their shadow was burned. And as they were starting to clean up the city, after all the debris, they started finding these shadows, and they realized, you can see this one here of someone looks like standing next to a ladder that got vaporized, as well as someone there. So these were images burned onto these buildings or the streets or whatever. It's pretty creepy. All right, now the Japanese knew they had no hope left of winning the war, so on September 2nd, 1945, the Japanese emperor did something never before done in the history of Japan. He informed his country that Japan had surrendered to another country. This is something of pride they'd had for 2,500 years. They'd never been surrendered. They'd never had to surrender, never been conquered. Remember when we talked about Kublai Khan? That was a big, big thing. So they finally had to surrender to another country. Now, most of the Japan lay in ruins. Not only were Hiroshima and Nagasaki destroyed by atomic bombs, but most other Japanese cities and industries were devastated by conventional bombs. As part of the terms of surrender, Japanese Emperor Hirohito had to go before the people and declare that he was only a human being and not really related to the gods. I call this the neener neener clause, right? There's no purpose of this other than to say neener neener, we won. It was a way of humiliating them. It was a way of saying, hey, listen, you bombed us and we're going to take control over. So we're just going to put this on you. So that's the only purpose of that one. Okay. Now, the spirit of the Japanese people had been crushed, but rather than continue to punish Japan further, America, under the leadership of General MacArthur, set out to rebuild the nation. Now, here's the cool thing. I'm going to stop here for a second because this is my favorite part of this story, and it's something that you'll never ever see or hear in any that I know of in any other part of history, in any other country, any other event. This is, and I'm going to stand on my little American soapbox here for a second. This is what really sets America apart. And yes, we have our problems, and yes, we got a lot of stuff going on, but this is one of the coolest things that I've ever seen in history from any country, and this is super cool. So, MacArthur set out to rebuild the nation. General MacArthur set out to rebuild Japan. Schools, industries, and homes were reconstructed. A new democratic form of government was set up, and eventually giving every citizen the age of 20 the right to vote. Emperor Hirohito was allowed to continue as emperor, acting only as a figurehead and spiritual leader, but Japan was not allowed to rebuild its military. The occupation of Japan by America lasted from 1945 to 1952, and under MacArthur's direction, Japan began its recovery from the war and rapidly rebuilt itself as a friend and ally of America. So here's the cool thing about this story. So let's pretend, I'm going to give another pretend story here. Let's pretend that every day I come to school, some kid punches me, right? And I don't do anything. And every day he comes and punches me. And I know it's coming. Boom, boom, boom. And one day I just haul off. And it's been weeks. And I just get nuts. I've had enough. And I say, forget it. And he punches me. And I just punch back. And I'm like, grr. And I punch. And he's down. And there's blood. And broke his nose. And his shirt's ripped. And there's blood everywhere. And I'm just mad. And I'm fighting. And, and I've got my fist up in the air. And I'm about to punch him out. We know it's going to take him out. And I'm going to knock him out. And I stop. And I say, do you know why I'm fighting you? Yeah, you're mad. It's like, no, yeah, I'm mad, but do you know why I'm fighting you? You disrespected me, and I can't stand anymore. I'm not going to stand up. You can't do this anymore. You're going to leave me alone? Yeah. You promise you're not going to, punch me anymore? I promise, I promise, I promise. And I let go of my fist, and I pick the kid up. Here's what's weird. I pick the kid up, and I say, okay, you know what? Let me take you down, walk you down to the nurse because I beat you up pretty good, and you're kind of bloody. And so I take him to the nurse. We clean him up a little bit. And the nurse says he needs to go to the doctor. So I'll drive him to the doctor. So I drive him to the doctor. And when we get to the hospital, I say, you know what? I give them my credit card. I say, you know what? The bill's on me. I'm going to pay for this. Well, aren't you the one who beat him up? Yeah, but I'm going to pay for it anyway. And then I say, you know what? I ripped your clothes. I'm going to take you to the store and buy you some new clothes and replace the clothes that I ripped. And in fact, you're not going to be able to work for a few days. So I've called your boss, and he got you off work, and I'm going to pay your bills for the next couple months while you recover, just so that you don't lose your house. Now that sounds stupid, right? That would never happen, but that's exactly what happened in the United States. The United States, we tried to stay out of this, we tried to stay out of the war, but Japan kept poking us and poking us, and finally they bombed us in Pearl Harbor, and we fought back, and in the war, we back and forth, but finally with the atomic bombs, we had our fist up. We could have dropped the third atomic bomb. We could have completely destroyed Japan, both physically and then when they surrendered to us, we could have made Japan a state. We could have turned it into a parking lot. We could have done whatever we wanted to do. But we said, listen, do you know why we did this? Yeah. Okay, good. Now we want to be your friend. The whole point in us opening us up back in 1850s with Commodore Perry was to be your friend. We want to be your friend. Even though you beat us up, we want to be your friend. Yes, we're going to put some restrictions on you for a while because we just finished a war, but we want to be your friend. And so we paid for the schools to be rebuilt. We paid for the buildings to be rebuilt. We helped them establish a government. We paid for a lot of that stuff to help them build. The truth is, the United States tax dollars paid to rebuild Japanese buildings that we destroyed with our own bombs. That's crazy, but it's a beautiful picture of saying, hey, you know what? We want to be your friend. We never wanted this to happen in the first place. I love that. That's awesome. Okay. Plus, they let Emperor Hirohito keep his job. And to this day, because of that, there is still, excuse me, the emperor is still in charge of Japan. And like I said a few weeks ago, I forget his name now because he just took over a year ago, but he is descended to Jammu. And the United States could have easily said, no more emperors, no nothing. But we let them keep their culture. We let a lot of stuff. So there were some mistakes being made, but that was a cool thing they did. All right, that's that. And that brings us to pretty much an end to this. There'll be a little bit of wrap up next week, which I'll talk about next week. So I know I went long today. I apologize, but hopefully you kept your attention on this, and hopefully you're not wanting chips and salsa too much right now or any other kind of snack. But I'll shut up. I'll let you take the quiz. Remember, 6 points. You got 2 attempts to do so. Make sure you read the questions carefully and answer them as best as you can. All right. The code for the quiz today is 228W2 for, World War II, 228W2. That's the code, and that'll get you into the quiz. All right. Have a good time taking the quiz. See ya.